The ballroom was the kind of room that announced itself before you entered it. Rose Addo had been to enough of these events to know the specific quality of a Lagos hotel ballroom on contract announcement night. The dressed-up energy, the handshakes that meant something, the champagne that was better than the champagne at ordinary events because the money in the room demanded it. She had earned her place at this particular event across 3 years of work on the Ikoyi development project, and she wore that earning the way she wore everything she had built in the last decade without announcing it simply as fact. She was 40 minutes into the evening when Amara touched her arm. Amara said, "Rose." Rose turned. Amara said nothing else. She simply directed her eyes across the room. Rose followed the direction. Across the ballroom, a man, broad-shouldered, well-dressed, the specific quality of someone who has learned how to wear good clothes after years of not being able to afford them. There is a particular way that self-made men occupy expensive suits, with a slight, unconscious carefulness that men born into money never have, because men born into money have never had to think about it. He had that quality. He was talking to the project developer. He was laughing at something the developer had said. He looked like James the way that a man looks like the person he was at 26 after 10 years of becoming someone else. The same jaw, the same way of holding himself, the same quality of presence. Different gravity. Rose stood at the edge of the ballroom with her champagne glass and she looked at him. She had learned to look at difficult things directly. It was a skill she had developed across 10 years of looking at difficult things. Her father's face on the morning she left the compound, the small flat she shared with James in those 8 months when everything was real and nothing was stable, the specific, ordinary quality of a Tuesday morning in an office when you are 34 and you are well and you have built something and the thing you built is enough and you have decided it is enough. She had looked at all of those things directly. She looked at this directly. He turned. Their eyes met across the ballroom. He did not look away immediately. Neither did she. Amara said something she did not hear. Then a waiter moved between them carrying a tray and the sightline broke and Rose turned away from the room and said to Amara, in the specific, composed voice she had spent a decade refining, "I need some air." She put her champagne glass on the nearest surface. She walked to the terrace. She stood outside with her hands on the railing and the Lagos night around her, and she breathed the way she had learned to breathe when something arrived that she was not ready for and needed to become ready for quickly. She thought, 10 years. She thought, his face is the same. She thought, he is wearing a suit that cost more than 3 months of rent in the flat we shared. She stood on the terrace for 7 minutes. Then she went back inside. She did not look for him when she re-entered the room. She went back to the table where the project developer was holding court and she listened and she asked one question that she already knew the answer to and the developer praised the question and she smiled with the specific, professional warmth that was part of who she had become and she did not look across the room for the rest of the evening. She went home at 9:30. She sat in her flat. She thought about James Cole for the first time in 9 years in a way that was not managed. She had not always managed it. In the beginning, the first 2 years after he went to Abuja, she had not managed it at all. She had thought about him the way you think about something that has been removed from your life before you were finished with it. Constantly, recursively, in the specific, exhausting way of a mind that keeps returning to an unresolved thing because it has not been given the tools to resolve it. She had thought about the 8 months. She had thought about the small flat. She had thought about the morning he told her about Abuja and she had said, "Go." She had thought about the specific quality of a door closing on a Tuesday morning and the specific quality of the silence after. She had not heard from him after. She had told herself in the first months that this was because he was busy, building whatever he had gone to build, doing the work he had said he needed to do. She had told herself she would hear from him when he had something to report, because that was James, that was the specific quality of a man who would not come back until he had something worth coming back with. The months became a year. The year became 2. She stopped telling herself things and simply lived with the silence, which was harder and more honest and ultimately more useful than the telling. She had searched his name online twice. Once in the 3rd year, on a Sunday evening when she was in a mood she did not want to examine closely and the impulse arrived before she could evaluate it. Nothing. James Cole was not a name that existed on the internet in any form she could find. Once in the 6th year, more deliberately, with the specific quality of a woman conducting research rather than a woman acting from longing. Nothing again. She had closed the laptop both times and gone back to whatever she had been doing. She thought about him the right amount after that. The right amount was occasionally, with the specific accuracy of a person who has processed something as fully as it can be processed with the information available and has arrived at a version of it they can carry. She carried it. She went to work. She designed buildings. She was good at designing buildings, had always been good at it, had known since she was 18 that she would be an architect because the specific combination of precision and imagination required for the work was the same combination she had always brought to everything else. She was good at her job and she was recognized for being good at it, and she had built, across 10 years, a career that was hers entirely and that no one had given her. She had done this. Not her father. Not James. Her. She sat in the flat on the night of the ballroom event and she thought about this, and she thought about the face across the room, and she thought about the suit, and she thought about 10 years, and she went to bed. She did not sleep immediately, but she slept. The message arrived the next morning at 8:14. She was already at her desk. She was always at her desk by 8, which was the specific discipline of a person who has learned that showing up early is one of the only forms of control available in a world that is otherwise largely uncontrollable. She was reviewing drawings when her phone lit up with a number she did not recognize. The message said, "Rose, this is James Cole. I am in Lagos for a project. I saw you last night across the room. I would like to have coffee if you are willing. No obligation either way." She read it twice. She set the phone down. She picked it up. She read it a third time. No obligation either way. For words at the end of a message from a man she had not heard from in 9 years. The specific, careful humility of someone who understands that 9 years and one ballroom glance does not entitle him to assume anything. She noted this. She sat with the noting for a long moment. Then she typed, "Tuesday. There is a coffee place near my office on Broad Street. I will send you the address." She sent it. She set the phone down. She went back to the drawings. Amara appeared in the doorway at 9:30 with 2 coffees and the expression she wore when she had something to say that she was not certain had been invited. Rose said, "Sit down." Amara sat. Rose said, "His name is James Cole. We knew each other. 10 years ago. Before." Amara said, "Before your father." Rose said, "Yes." Amara was quiet for a moment with the specific quality of a person receiving a piece of information that explains several other pieces of information they have been holding without context for years. She said, "How long?" Rose said, 8 months. Then he went to Abuja. I did not hear from him after. Amara said, "And now he is in a ballroom in a suit that cost." Rose said, "Yes." Amara said, "And you said?" Rose said, "Tuesday." Amara looked at her. She said, "Are you all right?" Rose thought about this honestly, the way she thought about all things honestly. She said, "I do not know yet. Ask me Wednesday." Amara nodded. She left the second coffee on the desk. She went back to her office. Rose looked at the drawings. She thought, "Tuesday." She went back to work. The coffee place on Broad Street was small and decent. The kind of place that has been good for long enough that it does not need to announce itself. Rose arrived 4 minutes early, which was her standard. She chose a table at the back, not hiding, simply preferring to see the room rather than have her back to it, which was a preference she had developed across 10 years of being a woman who managed her environments carefully. He arrived at exactly the time they had agreed. This told her something. James Cole at 26 had been punctual with the specific, disciplined punctuality of someone for whom time was a resource too limited to waste. James Cole at 36 was apparently the same. The suit was different from the ballroom suit. This one was simpler, more working day, but still wore with the same careful quality she had noticed across the ballroom. He saw her and came directly to the table. He said, "Rose." She said, "Sit down." He sat. They looked at each other across the small table. She thought, 10 years. She thought, his face is older. She thought, it suits him. She thought, stop. A waiter came. They ordered. The waiter left. He said, "You look well." She said, "So do you." He said, "I mean it." She said, "I know. So do I." He almost smiled. She said, "Tell me about Abuja." He told her. Not as a performance, she had been prepared for performance, had spent several days since Tuesday preparing to receive a performance of success, to assess it with the specific critical eye she had developed for exactly this kind of thing. It was not a performance. It was James stating facts in the way he had always stated facts, with the direct, unglamorous quality of someone who does not dress things in what they are not. He had gone to Abuja with a contact and 3 months of savings. The contact had led to a construction job as a site supervisor. The site supervisor role had led to a contractor's license. The license had led to the first small contract. The small contract had led to a slightly larger one. The decade had been 10 years of that, each thing leading to the next, each step unglamorous and specific, and the company he had now was the result of 10 years of unglamorous, specific steps. He said, "It was not fast." She said, "I can see that." He said, I did not come back to show you what I built." She looked at him. She said, "Then why did you come back?" He said, "For a contract. The Ikoyi development project. Your project, as it turns out." She said, "You are the subcontractor." He said, "Yes. I found that out after I sent the message. I want you to know that." She received this. She said, "I believe you." He said, "Rose." She waited. He said, "I should have come back sooner." The coffee place moved around them. The ordinary Lagos morning, people at other tables, the sound of the street through the open door. She said, "Yes." He said, "I did not have." He stopped. He started again. "I was not going to come back with nothing again. I could not do that again." She looked at him across the table. She thought about 24 and 26 and the small flat and the 8 months. She thought about the morning he told her about Abuja and she said go and the door closed. She thought about 9 years of silence and 2 searches and a name that did not exist on the internet. She said, "I know." She said it the way she said all true things, plainly, without performance, with the specific accuracy of a woman who has been carrying something for 10 years and has been carrying it correctly and is now, for the first time, setting it on the table between them where it can be seen. He looked at her. He said, "How have you been?" Not as a greeting, as an actual question. She said, "I have been well. Genuinely. I want you to know that. I built something. It is mine." He said, "I know. I looked you up." She said, "I searched your name twice." He said, "I found nothing." She said, "Nothing." He said, "I was not on the internet for the first 7 years. There was nothing to put there." She almost smiled. He said, "More than twice." She said, "What?" He said, "I searched your name. More than twice." She looked at him. The coffee arrived. They drank it. He told her about Abuja the way he told her everything, in order, with specific details, without embellishment. The contact had been a man named Mr. Bello, a civil contractor who had known James's uncle and who had offered him a site supervisor position on a road project outside Abuja on the strength of a recommendation and 2 hours of conversation. James had taken the position and had done it well, had done it with the specific, unhurried competence of someone who understands that the first job in a new place is not about money but about evidence, about establishing the quality of your work in a place where nobody knows your name yet. Mr. Bello had noticed. After the first project there had been a second, and after the second James had been made general site manager, and after that he had begun to understand the contracting business from the inside, the margins, the procurement, the relationships with suppliers and government offices, and the specific, unglamorous machinery of how large construction projects actually move. 4 years into Abuja, he had registered his own company. Small at first, the way all real things start small. 2 employees, a rented office the size of Rose's current kitchen, projects that were not large enough to impress anyone, but were executed well enough to produce the next ones. He had grown it the way he had grown everything, through the consistent application of quality and the specific discipline of someone who has decided that doing one thing excellently is more durable than doing 3 things adequately. He said, "I did not come back to Lagos for 6 years because Lagos was where I had started with nothing and I needed to be somewhere else while I became something." He paused. "That is not a complete explanation. It is an honest one," she said. "And the last 3 years?" He said, "The company grew. We won larger contracts. A government infrastructure project in Nasarawa. A commercial development in Abuja. We moved into Lagos because the Lagos market is where the serious work is." He said it without false modesty, it was a fact. He said, "And because I had spent 6 years telling myself I would come back when I was ready and I understood, eventually, that ready was not a destination I was going to arrive at. That I was using it as a reason to avoid the specific thing I was most afraid of. She said, which was, he looked at her. He said, coming back and finding that you had built a life that did not have room in it. She received this. She said, and if I had? He said, then I would have known. And knowing would have been better than not knowing. She looked at her coffee. She thought, 9 years. She thought, the photograph in the drawer. She thought, he is sitting across from me in a coffee place on Broad Street and he is saying the things I spent 9 years wondering if he would ever say, and they are the right things and I do not know what to do with the right things after 9 years of nothing. She said, I did not build a life without room. She said it the way she said all true things, plainly without performance. She said, I built a life with a specific absence in it that I learned to work around. He was very still. She said, I am not telling you this to give you something. I am telling you because you told me the truth and I am going to tell you the truth back. She paused. That is all it means right now. He said, I understand. She said, good. They sat for a while longer with their coffees and the ordinary busy noise of the coffee place around them and the specific, careful quality of two people who have said the important things and are now finding their way back to the ordinary ones. She said, your company. What is it called? He said, Coal Construction. She almost smiled. He said, I know. Not very imaginative. She said, it is clear. He said, that was the idea. She paid for her coffee. He reached for the bill and she had already put her card down, and he received this without making a production of it, which told her something. She stood. He stood. Outside the coffee place on Broad Street, the Lagos morning was fully operational. The traffic, the heat, the specific, unstoppable energy of a city doing what it does. She looked at him in the daylight. 36, broad-shouldered, the quality of someone who has been doing physical and demanding work for 10 years and carries it in his body. The same eyes. The same directness. She said, I am going back to work. He said, I know. Thank you for coming. She said, James. He said, yes. She said, the construction contract. Coal construction on the Ikoyi development. We are going to be working together. I want you to know that I can do that professionally regardless of any of this. She said it clearly because it was important and because she was a professional and because 3 years of her work was invested in that project. She said, can you? He said, yes. He said it with the same directness he said everything. He said, and I want you to know that I will not use the professional relationship as a way to be near you if you decide you do not want me near you. That is not what I am here for. She looked at him. She said, what are you here for? He said, to build a bridge. He said it with the small, careful quality of a man who has just made a joke that contains something true and is aware of both. He said, the development contract, and whatever else you are willing to have. She said, I will think about the whatever else. She walked back to her office. Amara was at her desk when Rose returned. She looked up. She looked at Rose's face with the specific, rapid assessment of a person who has been paying attention to someone for 4 years and can read their face accurately. She said, sit down. Rose sat. Amara said, tell me. Rose told her. Not everything, the full shape of it was more than a lunch break could accommodate. But the essential shape. The father, the arrangement, the refusal, the disownment. James and the 8 months. Abuja and the silence. The ballroom and Tuesday. Amara listened with the complete, unperformed attention she brought to important things. When Rose finished, Amara was quiet for a moment. She said, 10 years. Rose said, yes. Amara said, and the project. He is the construction contractor. Rose said, yes. Amara said, Lagos. Rose said, I know. Amara said, what are you going to do? Rose looked at her desk. The Ikoyi drawings. 3 years of her work. The project that was going to establish the next stage of her career. She said, my job. I am going to do my job. Amara said, and the other thing. Rose said, I do not know yet. Amara nodded. She was the kind of person who understood when a conversation had reached the boundary of what was available and did not push beyond it. She said, whenever you know, tell me. She went back to her screen. Rose picked up her pencil. She looked at the drawing. She thought about whatever else. She began to work. The professional relationship was, as Rose had said it would be, entirely professional. The first site meeting was on Thursday, 4 days after the coffee, with enough time in between for both of them to have settled into the specific, practical understanding that the project was the project and the project required them to be exactly what they were in a professional context. Rose attended with her colleague from the firm. James attended with his site manager, a compact, precise man named Cunnell who had been with Cole Construction since the second year and who had the specific quality of someone who runs things correctly without needing to be told twice. The meeting was about the basement structure and the foundation specifications and the interface between the architectural drawings and the structural requirements. It was a technical conversation. Both of them were very good at their jobs, and the conversation was productive in the specific way that technical conversations between competent people are productive. Information exchanged accurately, problems identified early, solutions proposed and refined. Rose said what the drawings required. James and Cunnell identified the construction implications. They found the places where the two needed to align and they aligned them. At the end of the meeting, James said, "The revised drawings by next Wednesday?" Rose said, "Tuesday." He said, "Tuesday works." That was all. Cunnell looked between them once with the specific expression of a person who has noticed something he is not going to comment on. He gathered his papers. They left. The call from her father came on Friday evening. She had been expecting it. Not because anyone had told her it was coming, but because Lagos was not large and Chief Addo had networks that functioned with the specific efficiency of a man who has been a person of influence for 30 years and who therefore knows things before he is told them. He would know that James Cole's construction company had won the primary contract on the Ikoyi development. He would know that Rose Addo's architecture firm had the commission. He was not a man who believed in coincidence, and so he would not have called it one. She answered on the third ring. He said, "Rose." She said, "Baba." He said, "I hear you are working on the Ikoyi project." She said, "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I hear James Cole is the primary contractor." She said, "Yes." Another silence. Chief Addo had the specific quality of a man who uses silence the way other people use words, as a form of communication that allows the other person to fill the space. Rose had grown up understanding this and had learned, eventually, not to fill it. She waited. He said, "Are you all right?" This was not what she had expected. She had expected the specific, diplomatic language of a man who is concerned about something and is approaching it indirectly. She had not expected, "Are you all right?" It was too direct. It was, she thought, the specific directness of a man who is getting older and has spent 10 years reconsidering something and has not yet found the language for the reconsidering but has found, at least, the capacity to ask a simple question. She said, "I am all right." He said, "He is doing well. The company. I have looked into it." She said, "I know he is doing well." He said, "Rose." She said, "Baba." She said it gently, not without firmness, but gently. She said, "I am not ready to have this conversation yet. Not on the phone. Not tonight." He was quiet. He said, "Will you come home?" She said, "Not yet." He said, "Your mother misses you." She said, "I will call her this weekend. I always call her." He said, "Rose." "I made." She said, "Baba." "Not tonight." A long silence. He said, "Good night, Rose." She said, "Good night." She ended the call. She sat in her flat for a long time. She thought about his voice, the specific, unfamiliar quality of uncertainty in it. Chief Addo was not a man who was uncertain. She had heard him be many things across her life. Certain, disappointed, resolute, occasionally warm in the way that powerful men allow themselves to be warm when they are not performing their authority. She had not heard him uncertain. She did not know what to do with that yet. She picked up the phone again. She called her mother. Her mother answered immediately. They talked for 40 minutes about ordinary things. Her mother's garden, the neighbor's new car, the family gathering that was coming up that Rose would not attend because she did not attend family gatherings. The specific ordinary texture of a mother-daughter relationship that has been conducted carefully around a wound for 10 years. Then her mother said very quietly, "He is trying." Rose said, "I know." Her mother said, "He does not know how yet. He is 64 and he has never had to learn how and he is trying to learn." Rose said, "I know, Mama." Her mother said, "I am not asking you to make it easy for him." Rose said, "I know." Her mother said, "I am asking you to leave the door open." Rose looked at the wall of her flat, the specific, carefully arranged wall of a life built from her own materials. A print she had chosen, a certificate from her qualification, a photograph from a trip she had taken to Accra 2 years ago that had been the first holiday she had taken entirely for herself. She said, "The door is open. It has always been open. I have just been waiting for him to come through it in the right way." Her mother was quiet for a moment. She said, "That is fair." They talked a little while longer. Then Rose said good night. She sat in the flat. She thought about open doors and waiting and the specific, patient quality of a woman who has been waiting for 10 years in 2 directions simultaneously. For her father to arrive correctly and for a man in Abuja to come back. And who has spent that time building rather than waiting, which is the only way to wait without losing yourself in it. She went to bed. She slept well. The weeks that followed had the specific quality of 2 things happening simultaneously in different registers. In the professional register, the Ikoyi development moved forward with the organized efficiency of a well-run project. The revised drawings went to James's team on Tuesday as promised. The structural response came back on Friday. There were 3 site meetings in the first month: the basement, the foundation, the ground floor framing, and all 3 were conducted with the specific, practical competence of 2 teams who know their work and respect each other's. Rose and James spoke to each other the way professionals speak, directly about the work with the appropriate clarity. Connell stopped looking between them after the second meeting. The project was good work and both of them were giving it good work, and that was the professional register. In the other register, James called on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the coffee, and asked if she would have dinner with him on Saturday. She said yes. The dinner was at a restaurant in Ikoyi, a good one, a considered choice, the kind of place that is neither performing expense nor avoiding it. He was there when she arrived. He stood when she came to the table. They talked about the project and about Abuja and about the architecture career and about the city and about the kiosk near the construction site run by a woman named Mrs. Ladipo who made the best fried plantain anyone on the site had ever tasted and who had apparently been making it since before the road beside the site existed. She said, "Do you remember the bread from the bakery near the flat in Lagos?" He said, "The one on Eco Street." She said, "Yes." He said, "I remember it." She said, "I still go there sometimes. It is still there." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Is it the same woman?" She said, "Her daughter now." He nodded. It was, she thought, the specific, careful way that 2 people return to a shared past, through the small specific things rather than the large general ones, through bread and bakeries rather than through the words that were said and not said. The large general things were there and would need to be addressed. But the bread was a beginning. They walked after dinner, without planning to, in the direction of nowhere in particular, and she recognized this as something they had done before, 14 years ago in a different part of the same city, when they were 20 and 22 and the world was the shape it had before any of the things that came after. She did not say this. He may have thought it. She did not ask. At the corner where their routes home separated, he stopped. He said, "I want to ask you something." She said, "Ask." He said, "Is there someone?" He said it directly as he said all things. He said, "I am not asking to, I am asking because I need to know the shape of what I am working with. Not assuming anything, just needing to know." She said, "No." She said it simply. She said, "There was someone. 2 years ago. It was not the right thing." He received this without performing a reaction. He said, "Thank you for telling me." She said, "James." He said, "Yes." She said, "Is there?" He looked at her. He said, "No. There was. It ended 3 years ago because she understood something that I was not honest enough to say directly, and she was honest enough to say it for me." Rose said, "What did she say?" He said, "She said, 'You are waiting for someone. Go and find out if she is still waiting.'" Rose looked at him on the corner of the street in the Lagos night. She thought, 10 years. She thought, a woman in Abuja who was honest enough to say the thing he would not say. She thought, the specific, unexpected debt you owe to people you have never met. She said, "She sounds like a wise woman." He said, "She was." They stood on the corner for a moment. She said, "Good night, James." He said, "Good night, Rose." She walked home. She walked and she thought about the woman in Abuja who had said, "You are waiting for someone. Go and find out." She thought, I am going to find out her name so I can be grateful to her properly. She went upstairs. She made tea. She sat at the table and she thought about open doors and women in Abuja and the specific, improbable way that 10 years can compress into a ballroom glance and a coffee on Broad Street and a dinner in Ikoyi and a walk home. She drank her tea. She was not unhappy. She was, if she was being honest with herself, the least unhappy she had been in a considerable time. Victor Mensah called James on a Wednesday. James was in a site meeting. The Ikoyi development had broken ground the previous week, which was the specific, satisfying moment when a project that has existed in drawings and meetings and contract documents for months becomes a physical thing in the world, something that will eventually stand and be used by people who will never know the names of the people who built it. He stepped out of the site meeting to take the call because the name on the screen was one he recognized from the project documentation and did not yet have a relationship with. Victor said, "My name is Victor Mensah. I believe we have not spoken directly, though we have a professional relationship through the Ikoyi project." James said, "Yes. What can I do for you?" Victor said, "I would like to meet. Not about the project. The project is going well and I have no concerns. About something else." He paused. "I understand you know Rose Addo." James was very still on the pavement outside the site. He said, "Yes." Victor said, "I am not calling to cause difficulty. I am calling because I believe the direct approach is the correct one in situations where the indirect approach tends to produce misunderstanding." He said it with the specific, considered quality of a man who has thought about how to have this conversation and has decided that plainness is the right tool. He said, "Are you available Thursday evening?" James said yes. They met at a restaurant Victor chose, quiet, well-considered, the kind of place that exists for serious conversations rather than occasions, which James recognized from the moment he walked in as a deliberate choice and which told him something about Victor Mensah before a word had been said. Victor was 40 now. He had the specific quality of a man who had been born into money and had chosen to do something real with it rather than simply inhabit it. The chairman of Mensah Holdings, a company that had diversified significantly under his leadership from the property and finance interests his father had built. He was not unpleasant. He was direct and precise and entirely without malice, which was the thing James had not expected and which was, he understood as the evening progressed, simply who Victor Mensah was. They ordered. Victor said, "I want to tell you something about 10 years ago. Not to relitigate it. It is over and what happened happened and there is no version of this conversation that changes it. But because you are back and Rose is someone I respect and I think there is something you should know." James said, "Tell me." Victor said, "I knew about the arrangement before it was offered to her." He said it directly the way he said all things. He said, "I also knew through the specific, efficient information networks of wealthy Lagos families that she was in a relationship. I told my father I was not comfortable with the arrangement under those circumstances. My father said the relationship would be resolved. I should have pushed harder. I did not push harder." He looked at James. He said, "I am not saying this to excuse myself. I am saying it because you came back and you are building something with her, professionally and perhaps otherwise, and you should know that the arrangement was not as simple as a father choosing a husband for a daughter who had no preferences of her own. There were adults who knew she had preferences and proceeded anyway." James looked at him across the table. He said, "Including you." Victor said, "Including me." In the specific way of a man who was 28 and uncomfortable and not yet the person he is now and who made the wrong choice when the right choice was available to him. He held James's gaze. He said, "I have thought about it since. Rose paid a price that she should not have had to pay and I was part of the machinery that extracted it." James was quiet for a moment. He said, "Why are you telling me this now?" Victor said, "Because you are back. And because if you are going to be in her life, in whatever form that takes, you should know the full shape of what happened to her. Not the version where her father made a decision and she refused. The version where several adults, myself included, made decisions and she refused all of them alone and paid the cost alone." James sat with this. He said, "Does she know this? That you knew?" Victor said, "No. That is also something I have thought about." He said, "I am telling you first because you are the person she is, because you are back and she is considering what that means. Whether you tell her is your decision." James said, "It is not my decision. It is hers to know or not know. I will tell her. Victor looked at him. He said, good. He said it the way a man says something he expected to hear and is relieved to hear confirmed. He said, she made the right choice. 10 years ago. The choice she made was the correct one. James said, I know. Victor said, I am glad you came back. James said, so am I. They finished their meal. They shook hands. James walked out into the Lagos evening and he stood on the pavement for a long time thinking about 28-year-old Victor Mensah who had been uncomfortable and had not pushed hard enough, and about the specific accumulated weight of all the adults who had known and had proceeded and had let a 24-year-old woman pay the cost of their collective failure to act correctly. He thought about what it meant that she had refused all of them. He thought about what it had cost her. He already knew what it had cost her. But knowing it in the abstract and knowing the specific, fuller shape of it, knowing that the machinery was larger than a father's decision, that there had been multiple points at which someone could have stopped it and no one had, made the knowing heavier and more precise. He took out his phone. He sent Rose a message. Are you available Saturday? I need to tell you something. Not about the project. She replied within 10 minutes. Yes. The bakery near my office closes at 3. Come at 4. He replied, I will be there. He told her on Saturday afternoon. She had made coffee. They were sitting at her kitchen table, the flat he had not seen before, the space that was entirely hers, the specific, organized quality of a life built by one person's deliberate choices. He looked at the flat the way an engineer looks at a structure, noting the load-bearing elements, the things that would stand. He told her about Victor's call, about the restaurant, about what Victor had said, the full shape of it without softening. He told her that Victor had known about their relationship before the arrangement was offered, that Victor had raised an objection to his own father, that the objection had not been enough, that there had been multiple adults who knew and had proceeded anyway. Rose sat across the table. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. He said, I am sorry for telling you this. I know it changes the shape of something you have already processed. She said, do not be sorry for telling me. She said it firmly, without anger at him. She said, I would rather know. He said, yes. She looked at her coffee cup. She said, he knew. Victor knew. James said, yes. She said, and he told you rather than telling me. James said, he said the decision about whether you knew was yours, and that he was telling me because I was back and he thought I should understand the full shape. She sat with this. She said, the full shape. She repeated it quietly. She said, I always assumed it was my father's decision entirely, that it was him and the Mensah family as a general force and that no one had specifically. She stopped. She said, Victor was 28. He was uncomfortable, and he did not push hard enough. James said, yes. She said, and he has been carrying that. James said, it appears so. She was quiet again. The flat was very still around them, the afternoon light on the organized space of a woman who has learned to arrange things exactly as she needs them. She said, do you know what the strangest part of this is? James said, tell me. She said, knowing makes me less angry, not more. She looked at him. She said, when I thought it was simply my father's decision, it was a large, flat thing. My father decided. I refused. Paid. That is a simple shape, and a simple shape is easier to carry anger inside of. She paused. But knowing that there were multiple people who were uncomfortable and who did not push hard enough, that is a more complicated shape. And I cannot be simply angry at a complicated shape. I have to understand it. James said, yes. She said, that is more expensive than anger. He said, yes. He said it with the specific, direct quality of someone who knows exactly what she means because he has done some version of the same calculation himself across 10 years of not calling. She said, I am going to call Victor. James said, I thought you might. She said, not in anger. To have the conversation that should have happened 10 years ago and did not happen because neither of us was the right person then to have it. She paused. He was 28. I was 24. Neither of us had the tools for it. James said, and now? She said, now I am 34 and I have had 10 years of building the tools. She looked at him. She said, and so has he. She called Victor on Sunday morning. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. It was not the conversation either of them had imagined having. It was not accusatory, and it was not a performance of forgiveness, and it was not the kind of conversation that resolves neatly into a single feeling. It was the specific, honest conversation of two people who were peripheral participants in a situation that had significant consequences for one of them, talking about it accurately, without the distortions of self-justification or unnecessary guilt. Victor said, "I should have pushed harder. I knew it was wrong and I chose the easier path." Rose said, "Yes. And you were 28 and I was 24, and the machinery of that decision was much larger than either of us." She paused. "That does not excuse your part. But it is the accurate context for it." Victor said, "I respect what you chose. 10 years ago, refusing the way you did." Rose said, "It was very expensive." Victor said, "I know. I am sorry for my part in that cost." Rose said, "I know you are." They were quiet for a moment. Victor said, "James Cole is a good man." Rose said, "Yes." Victor said, "For what it is worth, which may not be much, I think the choice you made 10 years ago was the right choice. Even with what it cost." Rose said, "I know it was. I have known it for 10 years. She ended the call. She sat in the flat for a while. Then she picked up her phone again. She called her father. This was the call she had been preparing for. Not preparing in the performed sense. She had not written notes or rehearsed lines. She had been preparing in the sense that she had spent 10 years becoming the person who could have this conversation, and that preparation was more durable and more complete than any rehearsal. Her father answered on the second ring. She said, "Daddy." He said, "Rose." She said, "I want to have a conversation. The real one, not a version of it." She said, "I am not calling to be reconciled in the way that you are probably imagining. I am calling because I have some things to say and you have some things to hear, and I have decided that the time for that is now." He said, "I am listening." She told him what she had learned from Victor. She told him not as accusation but as information, the accurate, full shape of what had happened 10 years ago, including the parts he might not have known and including the parts she was certain he had known. She told him that she had refused the arrangement because it was wrong to be arranged, not because Victor Mensa was a bad man or because the Mensa family was disreputable. She told him that the disownment had cost her in ways she was not going to enumerate because they were not the point. She told him that she had built a good life and that she was not there despite what he had done but in some complicated, honest sense both because of it and in spite of it. Then she said, "I want you to tell me why. The real reason. Not the family history, not the mutual interests. The real reason you chose a billionaire for me." Her father was quiet for a long time. He said, "Because I was afraid." She said, "Of what?" He said, "Of exactly what happened." He said it slowly, with the specific difficulty of a man saying something he has not said aloud before. He said, "I was afraid that you would choose someone without resources and that the life would be hard and that the love would not be enough and that I would watch my daughter struggle." He paused. "I saw the boy and I saw what he did not have and I made a decision based on what I saw." Rose said, "You did not see him." Her father said, "No." Rose said, "You saw his circumstances. You did not see him." She paused. "He had less than nothing when he left. He built an empire from it." She said, "He is the primary contractor on the most significant architectural commission of my career. He built that from a site cabin in Abuja." Her father was very quiet. Rose said, "I am not telling you this to say you were wrong about him specifically. I am telling you because the decision you made was not based on him. It was based on what you were afraid of. And I paid for your fear." He said, "Yes." She said, "I needed you to hear that clearly." He said, "I hear it." They were quiet. Her father said, "Will you come home?" She said, "Not yet." She said, "But I will come." She said, I am not going to perform a reconciliation. When I come it will be because I am ready and because things have been said that needed to be said and because I have decided that the relationship is worth the effort of rebuilding." She paused. "I think it might be. I am not certain yet." He said, "I will wait." She said, "Daddy, one more thing." She said, "James Cole is back. He is in my life. I have not decided in what form yet. But he is in my life and he is going to remain in my life, and I need you to understand that the version of you that made the decision 10 years ago is not the version I am prepared to have a relationship with going forward. Her father was quiet for a long time. He said, I understand. She said, I will call you next week. She ended the call. She sat in the flat. She was not crying. She was the specific, complete stillness of a person who has just said every true thing that needed to be said and is now sitting in the silence of having said them. She thought, that is done. She thought, not finished. Done. The accounting of it is done, and what comes next is different from what came before. She picked up her phone. She sent James a message. The conversation happened. Both of them. She sent a second. I am all right. More than all right. He replied, I know you are. She set the phone down. She looked at the flat, the organized, well-considered space of a life built correctly from available materials, and she thought about what a new door looks like. Not a replacement for what was built. An addition. Something that opens onto a different room that was always adjacent but had not yet been entered. She thought, tomorrow is Monday. There is a site meeting at 10. She thought, I will see him at the site meeting. She thought, good. What happened between Rose and James in the months that followed was the specific, unhurried thing that happens between two people who are old enough to know the difference between what they feel and what they decide, and who have decided to let the deciding be informed by the feeling rather than replaced by it. He stayed in Lagos longer than the project required. She did not ask why. She knew why. He did not explain. They both understood that the explanation was unnecessary and that its absence was itself a kind of statement. They had dinner. They had coffees that went long. They walked through the Ikoyi development site on a Saturday morning when the workers were not there, and he showed her how the structure she had drawn was becoming the structure that would stand, pointing out the specific places where the engineering had required adaptation and the specific places where her drawings had made the engineers' work easier because she had thought about the structure as a structure rather than only as an image. She asked questions. He answered them. They were, as they had always been in this specific way, very well matched. She went to the compound on a Sunday afternoon 6 weeks after the phone call. Not dramatically, not with speeches or performances of reconciliation. She drove there on a Sunday afternoon, and her mother opened the gate and held her for a long time without speaking, and then they went inside and her father was in the sitting room, the same chairs, and he stood when she came in and he looked at her with the specific, altered expression of a man who has spent 10 years waiting and has arrived at the moment of the thing he was waiting for and is discovering that the moment is nothing like the waiting. He said, Rose. She said, Daddy. They sat. They talked. It was not a short conversation, and it was not a comfortable one, and it did not resolve into a single clean feeling by the time she left. But it was honest, and it was the beginning of something rather than the continuation of nothing, which was what mattered. James met her father 3 months after that. Not at the compound, at a project site visit that Rose arranged because a project site visit was neutral ground and neutral ground was what the first meeting required. Her father arrived in his car with the specific, composed bearing of Chief Addo in professional settings, and James was standing at the site in his hard hat and his company jacket with the specific, direct quality of a man who has built something and is standing inside it and knows exactly what it is worth. They shook hands. Her father looked at the structure going up around them. He said, This is good work. James said, Thank you. It is a good design. They both looked at Rose. She said, Shall we start the site walk? They started the site walk. It was not forgiveness, and it was not reconciliation, and it was not the specific, clean resolution of a story that has decided on its ending. It was two men on a construction site acknowledging each other across 10 years of distance, with a woman between them who had built the life they were both, in different ways, standing inside. There is something this story wants to say before it closes. It is about Rose. It is specifically about what Rose did at 24 in a sitting room in her father's compound when a decision was being presented to her as an opportunity. She said no. Not because she was certain of the outcome. She was not certain of the outcome. She was 24 and she had limited resources and no safety net, and she was looking at a man she loved who had even more limited resources and who would leave for Abuja 4 days after she walked out of the compound with one bag. She said no because the yes was wrong. That is the whole of it. The yes was wrong, and she was not going to say it because it was wrong, regardless of what the wrong yes would have cost her and regardless of what the right no was going to cost her. The right no cost her considerably. 10 years of building alone. A father's absence. A love interrupted. The photograph in the drawer she did not open often. The 2 times she searched his name and found nothing. And also, an architecture career built on the merit of her own work. A flat arranged exactly as she needed it. The specific, durable quality of a self that has not been compromised for anyone else's comfort. The knowledge, the specific, clear-eyed knowledge that she had carried for 10 years, that she was right. She was right, and being right cost her what it cost, and she paid it, and she is still right, and the paying did not undo the rightness. This story is also about James, who left at 26 and built from nothing and came back with something to come back with and said, "I should have called anyway," and heard yes in response and received it without deflection. And it is about Chief Addo, who loved his daughter in the specific, costly way of a man who confused protection with control, who made a decision that was not his to make, and who said, eventually, in a sitting room that had seen the whole arc of it, "I was afraid." 3 words. The most honest 3 words he had said in 10 years. Fear is not an excuse, but it is the accurate description of what produces most of the wrong decisions that people make in the name of love. They are not being cruel. They are being afraid. And afraid people make decisions for other people because making decisions feels like control, and control feels like safety, and safety is what afraid people are always reaching for. Chief Addo reached for safety. Rose paid for it. And then Rose built something from the paying that was more entirely hers than anything the safety would have produced. That is the specific, uncomfortable arithmetic of this story. And the question it leaves you with is this. Is there a decision being made in your name right now by a parent, a partner, a family, an institution that is being called love but is actually fear? And have you said no to it? Or have you been waiting for the right moment, the safer moment, the moment when the no will cost less? The no always costs. Rose Addo said no at 24 in a sitting room with 1 bag packed and nowhere certain to go. The no was expensive. The no was also and will remain completely correct. The question is not whether you can afford the no. The question is whether you can afford to keep saying yes to the wrong thing. Because the compound gate will still be there. The question is who you will be when you walk back through it.